Hi, my name is Paul Muir. I'm a marine biologist and I work at the Queensland Museum. My role is working on coral research and also the museum's coral collection. Coral reefs are very complicated systems because they're so diverse. There's just so many things going on there in terms of chemistry and interactions between the organisms. But I look at just one aspect, and that's the biology of the corals. And I'm particularly interested in the distribution of those corals around the world, but also their depth distribution. So to do a lot of my research, I just use scuba gear for diving. But then to look at the deeper corals that are beyond the depth that you can safely dive, I use something called a remote operated vehicle, which is a little underwater robot that we control from the boat. What we're finding is that the deep corals are actually quite a significant Queensland habitat. If you include the areas of deep corals, potentially the area of the Great Barrier Reef could increase by 50%. My research on bleaching is looking at the variation in bleaching between different coral species, but also looking at the variation with depth. And it looks as if the deeper corals survive severe bleaching events often. And that's important because they may help the shallow reef recover afterwards, so they provide eggs and sperm at the next coral spawning. Some of the natural events that affect corals can be quite dramatic. After a cyclone, the reefs can be quite decimated for quite a large area of the coast. And by decimated, I mean that it just looks like a bulldozer's been through the reef. But the reef can come back from that quite quickly. So even though those cyclone events look very dramatic and sad when you see them, they're actually important for the long-term future of the reef because they help increase the diversity of species on the reef through time. But it's like a lot of things, it's everything in moderation. So like cyclones, crown of thorns also damage reefs. They're starfish that eat corals. They can eat quite large amounts of coral. And they're also important for the natural diversity of the reef through time. The problem is that we're seeing large numbers of crown of thorns on reefs around the world that are just decimating reefs and not allowing them to come back through time, and we think that that's actually related to human impacts. So climate change is probably the biggest risk to coral reefs. There's so many factors. There's the change in the seawater temperature, ocean acidification from rising CO2 levels in the air. There's also increased seawater temperatures that can cause coral bleaching. And the other thing that increased sea temperatures can do is potentially increase the severity and frequency of cyclones. So my research has two outcomes basically. There's a science outcome, which is understanding coral reef systems and how they operate. The second outcome is towards the preservation of those systems from ourselves, but also for ourselves in the end.